Good evening, everybody. Welcome, welcome. We are a small group right now, and we are recording because there are people who wanted to attend that couldn't. So I will go through everything that I have. And at the end, I'll save time for questions. And since we are a small group, and since our topic can be really kind of personal and specific, I'll stop recording for the questions. And since we're such a small group, you guys can ask freely whatever you need about your situation, um, yourself, your student, whatever. Sound good? So I'm going to jump right in because it is 5 o'clock and I like to be prompt. So um, before I do, though, I am going to put the link to the slides in the chat so you can follow along as you see links or just save it to revisit later. So that's in there. And I'm just going to jump right in to a topic that I'm really passionate about and have a lot of experience in, actually. So let's talk about getting what you need to succeed, specifically accessing accommodations in college. So that's what tonight is all about, is making it work if it's not. um, and um, or if it is working, but it could be better, how to make it better through accommodations. So my name is Allison Stipey, if we haven't met. I am the college and career counselor for Baker Early College, though everyone was invited tonight. So if you're a Web Academy student or family, so glad you're here. If you want to follow up with me after this, email is the best way to do that. And I'm also on Instagram every day on our Baker Early College account. And so if you are following along and it's easier just to send me a DM, you can do that too. I did mention, so yes, I'm a college and career counselor. I mentioned that I do have some experience though in accommodations, particularly. So before I was at Baker, I worked for 4 years with college students with learning challenges and all kinds of disabilities who were really struggling in college and needed some help. And a big part of my job was helping them get accommodations at the college and use them. And so this is a big part of my job for 4 years. So when I say I've been here and done that, I have in that I've walked students through this process a lot, literally side by side through the whole thing. So I've seen a lot. I've heard a lot of stories, and yeah, not have I won't say I've seen it all, but I've seen a lot when it comes to getting accommodations in college. The good, the hard, the downright bad, because it isn't always an easy or great process. But I'm here tonight to help you walk through it. So like I said, this presentation is going to be recorded. It is recording right now. It's going to be available on the blog. The link to it is right there. So if you want to go back and revisit anything there, you can. And really, tonight comes down to, and this whole topic comes down to knowing yourself, knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses. I'm one of those counselors who's fully willing to say we all have weaknesses. I won't call them like growth areas, even though that can be a nice thing to call it. But when it comes down to real disabilities, sometimes it's not about a growth area. Sometimes it's about a needing some help area. And so knowing what those are, knowing what you're really great at, and knowing what you need help with is so important in college. Because you really are having to do a lot of it on your own. And so knowing yourself through the process is really important. Knowing what you need, knowing what that help is kind of the next step. So here's where I'm struggling. And if I were to struggle less in this area, here's what it would look like. Here's what I would need to help me through that. And then knowing how to get it. Okay, I know what I need. Now, who's going to help me make it happen? So we're going to talk about all of that tonight. We're going to talk about what accommodations are, who qualifies for them, how do you get them, and then at the end, like I said, we're going to save time for questions. So some of you may have a lot of experience with accommodations already. Maybe you've had them throughout middle school and high school, maybe even elementary school. And now you're in college and suddenly things are really different. And if you haven't sensed it already, you will eventually, especially if you've had accommodations in the past, you'll start to sense those differences. Um, and we'll get to what those are in a second. But if you've never had accommodations before, but you're here because you feel like maybe you should, like, "Oh, man, I feel like I've always needed a little extra help. I do have a learning challenge, or a health diagnosis or something that I feel like is getting in my way. So what I think I need accommodations, but what are they? So accommodations are they're legally mandated modifications or adjustments, aids, services, those kinds of things that give a student with a disability an equal opportunity to benefit from the educational process. So it's ways of helping out where you need help, I'm gonna say. So if you've had them before and now you're in college, you're probably like, I thought I knew what accommodations were, but now suddenly they feel very different. And that's because they are. So I'm not here to tell you, like, okay, everything you've gotten in the past, you're going to get in college. In fact, I'm here to tell you a lot of what you've gotten in the past, you will not get in college. And here is why. So I'm not going to read this whole thing. You can go back and read it on your own if you'd like. This is from Central Oregon Community College's website. I feel like they summed it up very well in regards to the legalities of it. But Section 4 and Title 2 are pieces of legislation that have surrounded the world of accommodations and how to get them. And what this is essentially saying is in high school, and middle school and elementary school, which are required by law, so therefore are going to have extra um, supports around it because they're requiring you to do it, whereas college is not required. So in that setting, you are um, the school is required to provide what's called a FAPE, is what we call it in the education world, a free and appropriate public education to each child with a disability. And essentially what that means is they will do whatever it takes to support that student through the school process. So that can mean changing curriculum, like giving them a different kind of a test. Like instead of an essay test, maybe a student gets a multiple choice test. They can make big changes in the K through 12 process. In the college, not so much. At college, they're not required to provide FAPE. Rather, your post-secondary school is required to provide appropriate academic adjustments as necessary. So, and basically so that they don't discriminate. So it's not so that they can put you at a level playing field. It's just so that they don't overtly discriminate. Um, and yeah, what that looks like comes down to looking like is very different. So let's walk through exactly those nitty gritties. So in high school, just terminology wise, you have something called an IEP or a 504 usually. That's created by a SPED team, special education team, with the help of a school counselor. In college, those words don't exist anymore. I mean, the disabilities coordinator at the college will know what they are and what they mean and be interested in them, but your professors will not. In college, your professors will be interested in what's called a letter of accommodation, which is going to be created by the disabilities coordinator. So you'll never go up to one of your college professors and say, I have an IEP, and bring your IEP from high school or your 504. Those are moot. They're null and void now in the college setting. And so what you'll need is a letter of accommodation, and we'll talk about how to get one. But going back to the differences, in high school, your accommodations were coordinated and implemented by the school. Like everybody, all the adults were working together to make your accommodations and then help them come to fruition in the classroom. Um, In college, they're coordinated and implemented by you. So you are your SPED team. You are the person who um, is getting the process started, being handed the letter, and then communicating with your professors based on this letter. Here's what I need. And so you're the one who's making it all happen. It's on you now. Um, in high school, your parents were probably very involved with this process. And they had access to your records. They participated in the meetings, like they were your advocate. And in college, not so much. The parent does not have access to the student's records without the student's written consent. So usually it's called an ROI, or a release of information. You can ask for this. So you can say, I would like my parents to have access to my letter of accommodation. I want them to be in the meeting with me, maybe with the disabilities coordinator, like whatever that looks like for you. But in order to do that, you'll need to ask them for an ROI that you can sign, saying, I'd like my parent to be uh, in the loop. So a little different. In fact, let me go back to that in case there are any parents listening in who are very involved with this process and want to continue being very involved with this process. The best way to be involved with this process at this point, moving forward with your student, is to empower them, coach them, like walk them through what it looks like to advocate for themselves the way that you've advocated for them. The best way that you can support them through this is by passing that baton, um, if that makes sense. So, very different, I know. If it's unsettling, it's okay. Hopefully it'll get better as I talk more and more about the process and what you can kind of cheer your student on through on the sidelines. You'll still know how it all works and you can help them through it. Okay, another difference in high school. So the teachers, like I said, the teachers might have modified a lot of things for you, giving you different tests, giving you more time for assignments, like really changed things up for you. In college, the instructors are not required to modify the curriculum design or alter deadlines. So they're sometimes they will alter deadlines, but they're not required to. Sometimes they will allow you to do the test in a slightly different format. Like if it's a written test and you really feel like you can do it better orally, you might be able to work that out with a professor, but they're not required to do that for you. So you can ask for it, but they're not required to say yes and make it happen. In this regard, it becomes really important to learn how to advocate well for yourself, ask for what you want or feel like you need, and yeah, at least try. It never hurts to try. I have heard of professors saying yes to those kinds of things. I've also been in situations where the professors have said no to those kinds of things. So just prepare yourself for possible yeses and possible nos. Some examples of, so, yeah, you might be wondering, okay, like what kind of accommodations can I get in college? Because it's sounding like I can't get a lot. Here, you can get accommodations. Here's some examples of what some of them are. Audiobooks for students who do much better listening than reading, or maybe doing both at the same time. Getting extra time to not necessarily on assignments or essays or anything, but on in-class work. So for example, like you have a lab to do and you don't finish by the end of class. You can take it home with you, finish writing up all your answers, and take it back the next class session. You don't necessarily have to turn it in before you leave. That's a very common extra time situation that you can get. You can get access to either a fellow student's notes or the instructor's notes if note taking is really challenging for you and it's better for you just to listen and take things in rather than try to do both at the same time. Testing. So in regards to taking tests, you can often get extra time to take those tests, and you can take them in a separate area. So a lot of students have a challenging time. Let's say you have ADHD and it's really distracting to take a test in a big open room where everybody else is like maybe getting ahead of you, or the clock is ticking too loud and you can't focus. So you can take it in the testing center is usually what it's called on a college campus. Um, in regards to the being in the classroom, sometimes you can have alternative seating or desk options. Um, this one's kind of funky because in college usually you can like sit where you want, but if you need a special desk or you need to sit in the front row or whatever, and it's not happening, like you can make it happen. Lectures, you can get either like the teacher's recording of it if it's like a Zoom class and they record it, or you can record it yourself. So that's whether that's like a little audio recorder and you sit in the front row and record their lecture. That's usually the most common way to do it. So those are some examples. Really, the kinds of accommodations, and you might notice this in college, are not really helping you a ton outside of the classroom. It's more so how can we make learning inside the classroom as possible for you as we can. So, or conducive, how can we make this classroom as setting as conducive to learning as possible? Because in the classroom, there are physical constraints, time constraints, those kinds of things. Outside of the classroom, and you've noticed this probably if you've been taking community college classes with us for a while now, the college schedule is built to give you a lot of time outside of class to work on things. So the expectation in college is that you shouldn't need accommodations outside of the classroom because you have a lot of time to make it happen and you can do it in whatever setting you want to. So hopefully that kind of paints the picture of like colleges aren't like rooting for you to fail outside of the classroom. They are just putting that onus on you to make it happen in the way that works for you. Okay. Um, okay. So, sorry, go back. Who qualifies for accommodations? So if you've never qualified for accommodations before, or you're wondering, oh, I have in the past, but I'm not sure if I'll qualify in college, um, then let's talk about who gets these things. There are two things that students need in order to qualify for accommodations in college: a diagnosed disability or health condition, and two, a thorough professional set of documentation that paints a picture of the disability itself and its impacts on your life and learning. So oftentimes just the diagnosis itself is not going to do it for you. So let's say like you have been diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury and you have a piece of paper that says that you have this diagnosis, but you don't have a note from the doctor who diagnosed you saying, and here's how this person's TBI is likely going to impact their life and learning. So you need that too, oftentimes, in order to get accommodations. Okay, so when I say disabilities, what do I mean? I could be talking about physical disabilities. So these are oftentimes like the most apparent when we think of disabilities, things that are going to impact your mobility, your vision, your hearing. Maybe you're partially deaf and or partially blind. And so it's not super apparent right up front that you struggle with vision or hearing. So you need a letter of accommodation that shows like, here is the issue, here's where I need help, right? Um, Health related issues. So I mentioned traumatic brain injuries, things that are going to impact your physical health. So things like epilepsy. I've even seen letters of accommodation for students who have things like IBS, and they need to be able to just leave the classroom, or not be marked down for missing class. Like if you're graded on attendance. Things like that could be waived if your ability to attend might be impacted by your physical health. Learning disabilities. So things like a specific learning disorder, like a math disorder, reading disorder, dyslexia, or very commonly ADHD. This is the disability I have seen the most letters of accommodation written for. And then I've also seen letters of accommodation for students with what I would call psychiatric disabilities, things that are going to impact your mental health. So general anxiety disorder, PTSD, like those things can definitely impact your ability to sit in a classroom and concentrate for long periods of time. And so that can impact your ability to learn well in that environment. Okay, so those are some of the things. That was obviously not an exhaustive list, but hopefully you could put yourself in one of those categories. In regards to documentation, what does that actually look like? So maybe you have an IEP or a 504 plan. If you do, that's excellent. You're definitely going to want to bring that to your disabilities coordinator as you request your letter of accommodation. That's going to be like the educational plan that indicates all the modifications and accommodations you've had before. If you have an IEP, you probably definitely have an evaluation somewhere in your history where you were diagnosed through testing, interviews, whatever, to get a diagnosis and a description of the symptoms and their impacts on your learning. So some students have gotten this through the school that they've attended in the past. Some students have gotten this through a private party. It can vary, but you might have had an evaluation done in the past, and that honestly is like the ticket is if you have one of those evaluations, because those are usually very explicit in the diagnosis and the impacts on learning and the recommended accommodations. So if you don't have either of those, and maybe you don't even have this yet, but you could go get it. This is usually for those conditions like maybe it's like generalized anxiety disorder, and you sit down with your counselor who diagnosed you, your therapist, and you write out together how it's impacting your ability to learn in the classroom. So and they're signing off on it, on the diagnosis and the impacts. So it's coming from them. Maybe you're like writing it together in a session, but they're the one actually writing it and signing off on it. Same thing with a doctor, like an epilepsy diagnosis. You're sitting down with a doctor and talking about how you're getting a doctor's note, basically, like a very thorough doctor's note on how this condition, diagnosis, whatever, is impacting your ability to learn in college. Okay. So now that you have that diagnosis and the documentation, how do you get the accommodations? Here's my very simple step-by-step process. It's going to make it look very easy. It might not feel very easy as you do it, but it really isn't a lot of steps. So the first thing you're going to want to do is meet with your Baker advisor and possibly the Baker SPED team. Like if you want to update your 504 plan or something like that with the SPED team before you head into your accommodations, like seeking accommodations at the college, that's always a great idea. The date on your documentation can be really important. So like if your 504 plan is like 4 years old or your IEP and you want it up to date, because usually, not always, but what they really like to see is the diagnosis and the documentation being within the last 4 years or so. So if it's already 4 years old and you're about to graduate and head off to university, it's going to start to get outdated. Some colleges will still take it, but some might say, we really would like to see some more recent documentation. Go get it, please. So rather than go back and forth, it might be good to just get it now, get it refreshed, get that updated timestamp on it to help you out. So meet with your advisor too. So not just the SPED team, but meet with your advisor and let them know like, hey, I'm going to get accommodations at the college. And that way they'll be there to cheer you on, to help if you get stuck or you come up against roadblocks. So they're here to help you succeed too. And they want to do what they can to help you. So if you want them in the meeting with you, or you just want their help with the process, with the application, whatever, um, let them know. They want to know. It'll actually be really helpful for them to know if you have accommodations in college, because then they can help you, remind you to get them renewed, or they can suggest, okay, like let's try to get this accommodation in this classroom because they see that you're struggling here, right? So loop them in. They're on your team. Um, so once you have your team and your updated documentation, you're gonna usually submit an application online, and along with it, the whatever documentation you have. And then once they have your application and documentation, they're gonna go over it in the disabilities office at the college, and they're gonna usually reach back out to you once they've gone over everything and say, let's schedule an appointment. That can take like a week or two, but you definitely want to be like checking your email, checking your phone, like making sure that if they're trying to get a hold of you to schedule that meeting, that you are responding. And then before you head into that meeting, I just encourage you to prepare for it a little bit. Basically, read over your documentation. Like I said, know yourself, know what you need, and then talk to them about how to get it. So if you can usually on the school's website, in their disabilities, on the disabilities services website specifically, see what kind of accommodations they advertise, and like pick and pull which ones you're going to specifically ask for. And why, like the why behind it. Here's why I'm asking for this accommodation. So they're very good. I've sat in a lot of these meetings, and usually the disability coordinator is very good at asking you those kinds of questions that are going to draw that out of you anyways, and they'll make suggestions for accommodations. It's not all on you. They don't expect you to be a complete expert. They are the expert. But if so that nothing gets missed, like make sure you don't forget about an accommodation that you really want. You come prepared. Take some notes beforehand about like what you're going to ask for. Okay. So you'll go to that meeting, and in that meeting, you're going to talk all about the kinds of accommodations they want to set you up with. And then they'll give you some follow-up steps. And these are usually what the follow-up steps look like in regards to, okay, they're going to go write you this letter now that you've had this meeting, and they're going to send it to you. And so you get to review that letter and make sure everything you guys talked about is in it. That they didn't leave anything out that you talked about. Or didn't make any errors. Like instead of, let's say, maybe in giving you time and a half on tests, maybe they were supposed to give you double time on tests. And so like make sure they got that right, review your letter of accommodation, make sure it all looks good. And then you're going to send that letter to your instructors. Most colleges have a way of doing this digitally. Like you'll have a little hub where your letter will exist, and then you like click on the professors that you want to send it to, and it will get sent. Your letters will never say what your disability is. The only person who will know about that is your disabilities coordinator. They'll just see the accommodations that you're getting. So let's say you're getting a note taker. So now it's the professor's job to find you that note taker. And if they don't find you that note taker, then maybe they're giving you their notes. And if they're not doing either, then you're going back to the accommodations or the disabilities service office and saying, hey, my professors are not giving me the accommodations that are in my letter. And they'll sort it out for you. Okay. Let me back step really quick too and say, rather than just sending it digitally, I so strongly recommend you go and meet with your professor during office hours to talk about it. So once you've sent them that letter, you're going to go to office hours and say, hey, I sent you my letter of accommodations. Here's what's in it. Here's what I'm hoping to use in your classroom. Like maybe you don't need to use the note taker accommodation in their class, but you do need to use the taking tests in a quiet area. So you're going to tell them that. They need to know that, Like you want to make sure that they read your letter of accommodation, and then they're going to work with you to make it happen. Each professor is going to handle it a little bit differently. So some professors, let's say you have this accommodation that gives you extra time on tests and you're going to take it in the testing center. Some professors will say, sounds good. All your tests will be waiting for you. And you just call the testing center and say, hey, I'm coming to take my test. Usually you have to schedule it with them. So you go and take it on the day and time that you would have taken it in the classroom. So some of your professors, they might say, I'll just go ahead. Everything's on me. I've got this. I'll send all your tests to the testing center. They'll be waiting for you there. We don't need to talk about it for the rest of the term. Other professors will put it back on you and they'll say, okay, happy to do it. 1 week before every test, I need you to send me an email to remind me to send it to the testing center. Okay, so some of the professors are going to say, sounds good, help me help you. Okay, so that's why it's so important to sit down and meet with them and say, here's the accommodation I want to use in your classroom. What's that going to look like? You're going to ask them that. What is this accommodation going to look like in your classroom? If you have the note taker accommodation, what's this going to look like in your classroom? Are you going to find me a note taker or am I going to use your notes? Right. So figuring that out with them is going to be huge. It makes such a difference. And it's also going to show them that you're taking your learning really seriously. Like you want to do well in this class. And in order to do well, here's what you're going to need. So throughout the term, then you're going to self-advocate as needed. So let's say you didn't need an accommodation at first, that now you're like, oh shoot, like I do need to sit in the front of the classroom, or whatever it is. So you can always circle back around and say, hey, actually, I do want to activate this accommodation. So speak up for yourself when you need it. And then at the end of each term, you're going to renew your letter of accommodation, usually through that system that I was talking about. So sometimes it's through email, but your disabilities coordinator will tell you how to do that. But usually you need to do something to refresh it, to renew it, to keep it active. Okay. So that's the general overview of what it looks like at each school. I've actually created a guide for each college that shows you it gives you links to the contact info, to the actual applications, like the nitty-gritties of each step at that college. So like use that, save that for whatever community college you're at, because that will be, yeah, super helpful. I simplified it so that you're not having to like sort through the website. Some of the websites are very well organized and user friendly. Some of the websites are not so much as well. And I just try to make it as simple as possible through these guides. So here's what they all look the same, but the actual text is a little different. So it has the website, it has the contact info, and it has a lot of what we've talked about here tonight. But what you're going to want to look at is this heading right here. How do I request accommodations at COCC? And here's the link to the application. They have a list here of the kind of documentation that they'll accept. And then I also have this little link here. What it kind of is like a prompting for you to go get that documentation, like when you're sitting down with your doctor, your therapist, whoever. What questions are you guys answering together? That's going to get you what you need. But you can also just sit down with if you already have your documentation, sit down with your documentation, go through it and kind of answer these questions for yourself. That's going to help you prepare for that meeting very well. Okay. Okay. One thing I want to note too, it's not technically an accommodation because any student can use it, but a lot of colleges are starting to offer academic coaching through their tutoring centers. So that's a great thing to look into at your community college. Stop by your tutoring center and ask, do you guys offer academic coaching at all? Basically what that means is usually an older student is going to meet with you maybe weekly or whatever to kind of make sure you're on track and you're getting everything you need and you're staying organized and you're accessing not just the things that you need through your accommodations letter, but all of the services that the campus provides. Like they can help you, go to the writing center when you have an essay or whatever. So this person can just like be with you through the process on campus to help you out. So not just at community college, more so at your university, at your next university. This is most universities offer this. Some community colleges do. Speaking of universities, if you are a student who has highly relied on accommodations in the past, has needed a lot of help getting through academics, and knows that they are going to continue needing a lot of help getting through academics, first, I super applaud you. It's awesome to stick with something even if it's hard. And these are some universities that really keep students who need accommodations in mind. I mean, every school is getting better and better at it every year as we work through issues of equality and inclusivity. But I just wanted to point these ones out because these are the ones that kind of stand out to me. So at the University of Arizona, they have something called the SALT Center that it's just an awesome resource. I have the link here. I'm not going to go through the nitty-gritties of all of these, but it's very cool. A lot of our students apply to UC schools, and if you're doing that, awesome. Keep UC Irvine in mind. Of all the UC schools, they have perhaps the most extensive disability service center, and like particularly highlight neurodiversity on their campus as a major value. So keep UC Irvine in mind if you're interested in the UC schools. If you are like trying to get off the West Coast and go somewhere else, there are schools that have specific programs for students with disabilities. So, learning disabilities in particular, Northeastern University is one, as well as American University. I think American Universities is just for the first year program to like really make sure you get through the first year with a lot of support. Anyways, they're all really cool programs. A lot of colleges offer these kinds of things. These are just four that kind of stand out to me, like I said. So wherever you go, you'll be able to access accommodations. So don't think that these are like the only four schools. Every college has a disabilities center that is going to help you out. Okay, so I am going to pause here. I'm going to stop the recording.